So, last time we discussed, we're in the 7th Pirkei of Shemona Prakim. So, as we spoke last time, we saw that the Rambam's idea of Nevuah is that prophecy isn't just that Hashem uses a person, any person, to speak as a channel through him. A Nevuah is a state which a person has to bring himself to, and that requires a tremendous amount of work. And as we'll see today, also some natural. Not every you have to sort of be. There are certain natural gifts that are prerequisites, and without that, the person can't be a Navi. So we'll see that. We'll see more of that today. So with the reason why we're having this conversation is because the ultimate person. So the Rambam said in Pirkei Beis. Let's go back. Pirkei Aleph. In the first Pirkei, the Rambam gave us the Nefesh Adam and Nefesh Achar. So a person has one soul, and this soul has 5 different faculties and 5 different expressions. There's the nutritive soul, there's the sensory soul, appetitive soul, imaginative soul, and the intellectual soul. Then the Rambam said, so then we saw the Rambam really, in the Pirkei Beis, splits it into 2. So you have the vices and virtues of a person are in the intellectual soul and in the appetitive soul. That's really where you have a person that is a praiseworthy person. You have a person that's a respectable person, and on the other hand, you have a person that is you have a person that's lacking certain qualities, whether it's moral qualities, ethical qualities, and even intellectual qualities. That is a person that is a lesser person. So you have these 2 categories. That is, so from the 5 souls, the 2 that have the vices and virtues are the intellectual soul and the appetitive soul. And the parts of the person that a person needs to work on are the imaginative soul and the appetitive soul. I think that's what he said. No, the sensory soul and the appetitive soul. In any case, so the reason why we're having this conversation is because, there's halacha shechanach. The Gemara says that Chasidim are Rishonim Yishoin Shachas Kodem Atfilu Mispalalim. So the first Chasidim, the Chasidim of the past, right? That's what the Gemara. The Chasidim Rishonim, the Chasidim of the past, they would, before davening, they would meditate for an hour, and only afterwards would they daven. And that's what the Gemara says. And the way it's quoted in Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Tzadik Ches, which is a quote of the Rambam, is that the reason why what they would do for an hour, that Shoyin Sha'achas Kodem Atfilah, they would meditate ad shegiu korav l'madregas hanevuah, until the idea would be that by the time they daven, they would have reached certain levels intellectually until they were nearly in the madrega of prophecy of nevuah. And this is Mamish the Rambam. This is the Rambam. The Chassidim Rishonim, the Chassidim of the past, they were people that were perfected in their emotional state, in their sensory soul, in every part of their being, in their appetitive soul primarily, that their middas were pure and their intellectual reasoning was very developed at a very high capacity. And therefore, if they, before davening, they channeled all their thoughts and they sort of climbed a certain ladder until they got close to prophecy. Now, why didn't they get to prophecy itself? That's because Hashem stopped them. And this is obviously something that we spoke about previously. In the last year we spoke about this. We didn't talk about it enough because really there's a tremendous amount to talk about in the Rambam's idea of prophecy versus what the common belief of Nevuah is, and on the other hand what the philosophers think. The Rambam presents both of these things and he disagrees with both of them, and he has sort of a synthesis of how Nevuah is how Nevuah works. But what's important for us to know is that the ultimate person, the ultimate human being, the person that is the tachlis hashleimus, the person that is the tzura, that he has the form, right? He is the emes person. That is really the navi. That's a person that all his midas are refined and his intellect developed to a state where he could connect to Hashem and he could actualize his, the das, which is the reason why he was created in the first place. So now the Rambam says as follows. So now we're going to talk about what the Rambam says, that in Nevuah we see that there are madregas, there's Nevi'im that see Hashem, and that connect to Hashem and they communicate with Hashem. In their Nevuah is through many barriers, And then there are those who have fewer barriers. And Moshe Rabbeinu only had one barrier, and that's a spaklar, that's like a mirror, and that barrier was translucent. All the other Nevi'im had this murky spaklar, this murky mirror. There are mirrors that are, it's a screen. So Moshe Rabbeinu had a screen that was transparent, and all the other Nevi'im, they have multiple barriers, and maybe some of them are more murky than others, till the point where you have very, very ambiguous nevuas, sometimes where you see that the Navi can't really express properly what he sees, and those are the later Nevi'im. Okay, so now the Rambam is going to explain what does it mean when we say that Nevi'im have more barriers and less barriers. What is this whole shmooze? And then we really have to understand what does that have to do with us. Now the real reason is what it has to do with us, because we all have to be Nevi'im. The reason why we were born is that we should actualize our potential. The potential of a person is his das, and that is that you have to put yourself in a position to refine every part of your being that you should be able to be a Navi. Now, if you will actually prophesize, then it's not up to you, that's up to Hashem. But you have to put yourself in that position, and if you don't gear your entire life to put yourself in that position, then really it's a waste of a person. That's sort of, you were given a Maserati, and you're using it for the stereo system. You're not using it for the race. Or I don't even know if a Maserati is a sports car, but is it? Is it a luxury car or a sports car? It's a luxury car, so what's a good sports car? I don't know. Anyway, but that's not my... anyway, but the idea is that if you were given this beautiful, sophisticated sports car that has potential to go in the biggest race, and you use it for the stereo system, then obviously it was a waste to give you that sports car. In the same way, if you were given das, and this intellect has the capability to understand Hashem's relationship to you and to the world, and the nature of Hashem's existence, to the point where you can mamish reach Madarius of prophecy, and you use that to for garbage or for anything else, even things that are sophisticated sciences. But if you don't do that for the sake of getting to metaphysics, then it's a waste of a machine. So, akavana b'zeh inyan. This is going back to what we spoke before, and that is the different barriers and screens that Nevi'im have in their nevuah. So this is what I'm going to tell you. We saw in the second period that the milas, which is the virtues, so you have intellectual milas, and then you have milas in midas, right? You have intellectual, you have milas and chesroinus in intellect and in midas, meaning that you have certain vices or certain deficits that people have, they're lacking in their intellectual capacity. That is, let's say, ignorance and stupidity, or they can't really understand anything. And then you have in immorals, right? That's sichlus and tipshus, and koshavan means that they just can't grasp. They don't have the ability to comprehend sophisticated ideas. And then you have the same thing in midas, morality. You have people that have a tremendous amount of lust and arrogance and anger and jealousy and brazenness and greed. All these things are vices, are moral vices, right? And there's obviously many, many more. So, and to understand exactly from the Midas perspective, right? From the Midas, the personality traits that we just spoke about, like lust and arrogance and greed, that is what we spoke about in Lent in the fourth Perek. And what the Rambam says is that all these things that we just spoke about, either intellectual limitations, like stupidity, that people are actually stupid. Now, it's not a choice. They were born stupid. And they were born without the ability to comprehend sophisticated and deep ideas. These are the screens that we're talking about. These are the barriers that separate between a person and Hashem. So, we have to split them into two. We'll do that in a second. Amar Anovi, the pasuk says, "Ki yem avaneseichem o yem avdilim beinechem u'bein aleichem." Yoimar, ki chetoenu, that our averis ve'hen elu arois, and these are these evils, these bad qualities. Let's talk about the midas because that's easier to understand. If a person has a tremendous amount of tithe, or he's very greedy, or he has anger issues, then these things are barriers between him and Hashem. Now, when this person is going to try to put himself in a position to connect to Hashem intellectually, so again, if he doesn't have the intellectual capacity because he's dumb, then he's just not capable, right? So in order for a person to connect Hashem through his mind, he needs to have a sophisticated mind, and he needs to have certain qualities. He needs to have been born with certain qualities. Now again, there obviously is a scale, right? So there is a person that maybe isn't the most, wasn't born with the most sharp mind, but if he develops and if he constantly works on himself and he goes up and up and up, then he'll get to a certain position. But people that are born handicapped, just like a person that, it's not his fault, but such a person obviously can't reach Nevuah, because again, according to the Rambam, Nevuah is a connection that a person builds through his intellectual reasoning mind and Hashem. But let's talk about Midas, because that's our, and then we'll go to the next, paragraph. So then he says, so when a person has limitations, whether it is in morality, in his ethics, in his personality, right? If this person has a corrupt personality because he's very greedy, then this person won't be able to think. I mean, his whole personality is dysfunctional, because if he's greedy and he's angry, then he can't put himself in a position to connect to Hashem, because his whole machine is messed up and he won't be able to think objectively, clearly. He won't be able to get to the truth, because a person that is not refined, his characteristic, his personality traits are not refined, that person, all his thoughts will be, it's like putting pure water into a dirty vessel, right? If his vessel is easily manipulated through money, or through lust, or he's triggered easily angrily, then that person, his entire reasoning will always be clouded, his judgment will be messed up, and that's why when the entire function of Pirkei Avos and Shemona Prakim and Hilchos Deis and Mishlei and Keheles and so on and so forth is to put a person in a position that morally, that ethically, that his personality, his midas, his appetite of soul should be refined, and also that ultimately a step afterwards is that his mind should be developed in a way that he can connect. Because these are the two things that if a person is lacking in these areas, they are barriers, right? So if you're trying to connect to Hashem, and you have greed and anger and lust and so on and so forth, every one of these things is another barrier. And therefore, when you're going to try to connect to Hashem is even further and even further. Because really Hashem is here that you should connect Him, and you could go connect Him. But what's separating you from Hashem is that you have, if you connect Hashem through your own machine, right? If you're the channel in which you're bringing Hashem's MR. Now, if you have in your mind and in your soul, you have certain limitations, and you will see Hashem through these limitations. That is what he's saying. If you will see everyone. There's like they're saying, you see it through your own lenses, right? And if your lens is murky because you see everything through a lens of greed, and you see everything through a lens of self-interest and anger and whatever it is, then you will perceive Hashem too through these various barriers. And that's why at a certain point now, if you're a person that really has a lot of work to do, like most of us, then you won't see. Right? Because if you have that much greed and that much anger and that much whatever it is, then you won't be able to see. It's going to completely blind you. You have a blindfold on you. And your blindfold, by the way, isn't from Hashem's perspective. The blindfold is your limitations and your handicaps. They are the blindfold that make that they smear your eyes that you can't see. Now what happens is when you refine them, so you scrape off a level. And you scrape off even more, and then your connection to Hashem becomes more translucent. The barriers become see-through, and eventually till you reach a Madrega of Nevuah. So that really is the idea of a Navi that is on a higher Madrega, which is someone who is more refined. And then there's a Navi, which again, obviously is a person that is tremendously worked on and is extremely refined, but he, in comparison to the other Navi, his vision is a little more murky. V'da, kikol Navi, any Navi, lo yisnabe ela lachash yiknu lo hamaylis asichli is kulam. The only way someone can be a Navi is if he has every single virtue pertaining the intellect. And this is something that's very controversial in the Rambam's perspective of Nevuah, but the Rambam is unapologetic about it, and it's absolutely crucial and critical to the Rambam's perspective of Nevuah, and that is that the biggest tzaddik in the world, if he is not intellectually sophisticated, and he does not understand metaphysics, and he doesn't understand how Hashem runs the world, and if this is a tzaddik that never did an Aveirah his whole life, but he never understood the world. Now, according to the Rambam, it's going to be through the philosophic discipline, and according to the Kabbalah, it's going to be through Kabbalah, but both of these things that ultimately are are sciences that deal with Hashem's relationship to the world and of his own and kaviyachol, of the nature of Hashem's existence and his relationship to the world. Without that, as big of a tzaddik as a person could be, even if he didn't do an aver his entire life, he can't build that connection, because the connection from the person with Hashem, a person with the divine, that connection happens in the mind. And if your mind is not developed, then you could be the biggest tzaddik in the world. It's like, the biggest. I feel bad for you. You show up to a race, and a person doesn't have hands. He could have a good car, but if a person doesn't have hands, or if the car, you have the best car in the world, but it doesn't have wheels. It's not the guy. You're missing the main ingredient, sort of. According to the Rambam, a person, in order to reach nevuah, even if all his characteristics are refined, even if every single, he has zero kinna, zero type, zero covet, nothing, no greed, the person is absolutely the most refined person in the world. By the way, like a baby the day he's born, which according to the Rambam is the perfection of human existence. But the person doesn't have a developed, through what? The main ingredient is the mind. And therefore, a Navi, the first and foremost, a Navi needs to be extremely, his rationale and his intellect has to be very, very developed. What's with the Midas? The Midas, says the Rambam, that a Navi has to have roiv mailas hamidas v'chazak shaban. He has to have the important, he has to have most of the midas, of the virtue, of the midas of the pertaining characteristics, morality, and he has to have most of them. He doesn't have to have all of them. He has to have most of them, and the dominant ones. He needs to be well, exercised and refined in the main areas of what we deal with regarding our personality, and that is what Chazal say. Eina nevuah shoyre ela al chacham giber v'asher. A person could only be a Navi. Eina nevuah shoyre. There's no nevuah if a person isn't wise, strong, mighty, and rich. So what does the Rambam say? Chacham kol ma'alis hasichlis b'li sofek. So a person needs to be a chacham. What does a chacham mean? Chacham mean a person that has all his mental capacity is extremely developed, and he has every single mile and every single virtue regarding. Let's say he has a developed imagination, which is very important. A Navi has to have a strong imagination. A Navi has to be able to. He has to be very smart. He needs to be able to understand very idle things, right? So all these things, a Navi has to have all of this. Now, Asher and Gibber, he doesn't have to have every single mila regarding midas, but he has to have the important ones. And Asher is mimalas midas. This is turning loy mestapkes, right? Ezu Asher hasamech bechelka. That means someone that's happy with what he has, someone that's the opposite of greed. So again, most people in the world get completely lost when it comes to money, and they're easily manipulated with money. And therefore, because this is one of the main vices in a person, so someone who wants to be a Navi has to be clear. He has to be a Asher. Asher means he has to be samech bechelka. You can't buy him with money. You can't manipulate him with money. He won't want to. Some people are afraid to talk to power because sometimes it has to do with money. If a person is happy with whatever he has, that is absolutely critical for a Navi. So besides being a Chacham, and a Chacham includes every single virtue regarding the intellect and the reason and that. Besides that, a person has to be an Asher. He has to be Samech Bechelko. You can't buy him. He's not greedy. He doesn't have kinner. Being a Samech Bechelko includes a lot of these things. It's not only greed. It includes also jealousy, right? People are jealous of other people. And people are not going to steal, they're not going to cheat. These are someone who's Samech Bechelko, which is the Shem Klali for a person's relationship with property, a person's relationship with money, and with a power struggle that has to do with that. So that is absolutely critical for a Navi to be an Asher, and also he has to be a Gibber. A Gibber means and that's meaning, and that includes everything that has to do with self-control. And now he has to be a Gibber. A Gibber means that his mind, he is led not by his instinct. He's led not by his, the whims of just his appetite of soul. So the two main categories of a Navi has to. So we really hear what it says. A Navi has to have three things. First of all, milas of sichlios kulam. He has to have all the intellectual milas. That is, without that, he doesn't have a machine, because everything happens through that. And then when we're talking about the midas, he has to have most of the midas. He doesn't have to have all of them, because again, like we said, the midas are not a problem. The midas are barriers. Again, so the person has the mind. Now, this mind is ingredient number one. Without that, you don't have anything. Now, through your very developed high, he's a big makubal, he's a big philosopher, whatever it is. Through this mind, and that's the mind that he will connect intellectually to Hashem, through that mind, he's going to perceive his nevuah. Now, what's going to be in between him and his mind, sort of, is his personality. And that's where you have all these screens. That's where you have his kenetayim and kovet. And therefore, it's critical, if you don't want to be blind, then a person has to be a usher and a giver. He has to be a sameach bechelkoi that takes care of greed and jealousy and everything that has to do with money and power and so on and so forth. And then he has to be also a giver, which means that he has control over his personality. That means that he's the boss, he's dictated by his mind. He's not dictated by his Yetzer Hara. And that is, so that includes obviously all the midas. That includes the way he eats, the way he sleeps, the relationships that he has, his anger management. All these things are related to kavish yitzhar. So therefore, so again, back to nevuah, which nevuah obviously is the tachlis of why we're here, even though chances are that as of now we still not zoiche that the institution of nevuah was discontinued. Hopefully it'll come back soon. But if we want to actualize our potential, then we have to put ourselves in a position that from our side there's no mania to nevuah. And the way we daven is that we completely connect to Hashem. And for that we have to first of all develop our mind, and then we have to take all these barriers, which are all the midas, and we have to work on them. And the critical ones obviously are the general categories are, first of all, without that we can't really start, is Ashir and Gibber. It's to be a Sameach Bechelkoi and to be a Kovish Yitzhar. And someone that is Kovish Yitzhar and he's Sameach Bechelkoi, that person, he minimizes the amount of barriers between him and Hashem, between him and his understanding of Hashem. And then, he can put himself in a position, to actually reach tremendous madregas. And tomorrow we'll see where the Rambam goes through the Nevi'im, and he sees and he proves that Nevi'im could be flawed. Now again, the flaws are in characteristics; they are not in the mind. And the Rambam's point is that this is what I told you, that there are certain Nevi'im, that even very big Nevi'im, like Yaakov Avinu, David HaMelech, Shlomo HaMelech, Eliyahu HaNavi, Elisha HaNavi, even all these big Nevi'im that were really, truly big Nevi'im, and we have their Sifrei Nevuah and Tanakh, even these people, they have limitations. And what does that mean? That doesn't mean that they're not holy and they're not big, and obviously they're tremendous Nevi'im. That just means that these slates were a little murky, versus obviously Moshe Rabbeinu, and that's something we'll see in the next 2 shiurim probably.